This is how to kill me in style.
Alright. Alright. Hi, everybody. I'm Ronin Warlord Magni, and I have Squire Gilligan, Kirkland Special. Thank you all for coming to the next installment on my Newb to Warlord series. Today, we're going to talk about fighting styles, and this is sort of a general overview of fighting styles. This is a more conceptual class. We're not going to be learning any particular shots or anything like that. This will be more of like an intellectual framework to kind of conceptualize fighting. I want to put out there really quick that I did not generate or come up with this like abstract kind of concept around fighting and frameworks. This is something that was put together by Tisco and I believe Tato, or maybe it was Tugan. But other warlords and sword knights like figured this out, or kind of like created this framework or idea. Okay. The main concept here is kind of that we're going to be talking about is like the benefits and consequences of each style, and how to, when you're fighting somebody, assess the general trends and patterns that they're using, and then how you can sort of use that understanding to adjust how you fight to overcome and like get some advantage over that. Does that make sense? Okay, great. When this framework was developed, it was kind of put in a rock, paper, scissors sort of style where it's conceptualized where you have these 4 different styles, and this guy beats this guy, this guy beats this guy, this guy beats this guy, this guy beats this guy. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. And then the last thing that I'll talk about at the end of this class is sort of the limitations and how I view this framework can be used in, or the limitations of this framework in real fighting. Okay. But first off, let's talk about the framework itself. Okay, so I call them paradigms, and then there's modes, right? So the paradigm is offense versus defense, right? Offense is I'm more concerned about throwing shots and aggressing, right? And then the other paradigm is defense, where you're more concerned about blocking, stepping out of range, right? You're more defensive. I think these are pretty straightforward sort of concepts for people to think about. And then you have 2 different sort of modes. You have a direct mode where everything is really straightforward, right? Like, I'm going to throw a shot, boom, boom. That's very direct. There's not a lot of like smoke and mirrors going on. Everything that Gilligan is going to see or I'm going to see in a direct style or direct mode, he's not going to like try to fake me out. Indirect is kind of the opposite. There's smoke and mirrors. You're trying to get your opponent to do something so you can counteract that. Does that kind of make an idea? So sort of the way I think indirect is a much more subtle sort of concept. I would look at in terms of indirect fighting, check out my range control video, check out my feints, fakes, and baits video. Those are indirect fighting methods. A range fighting in sword and board, right, which is like up here, that's often a very direct fighting method because it is a grind, right? The way that this is kind of pictorially shown is up top you have direct offense, okay? Direct offense beats indirect defense, or direct offense beats indirect offense, and I'll explain more about this. Indirect offense beats direct defense. Direct defense beats indirect defense, and then indirect defense beats direct offense. And I'll explain again how these all kind of work together. So direct offense, this is, I think, what a lot of people think about when you start fighting. It is, I'm going to throw, boom, right? I'm trying to hit my opponent. What I'm going to throw is what I'm going to throw. It's a lot of flurries. a lot of my fighting style is kind of built around direct offense. You can also consider counter timing, where it's like a block strike where I throw or you throw. Why do you have a flail? Disappointing. So, like, if I'm fighting, I throw, you throw, block strike, right? It's very straightforward. I want this. Direct offense is very grindy in a sense. Okay, lots of shots being thrown. Everything is here, right? Everything is being thrown directly. Indirect offense. This is where you're throwing your fakes and your feints. Where I'm gonna, boom, right? The spot that I acted like I was gonna throw was to incur a response, an opening, and then I throw the money, right? That is indirect offense. You could also do this with your body. You can do like side steps, where like if I step this way and throw that way, right? I mean, check out my feints, fakes, and fates video. I'm not gonna go to like an in-depth description of how you can do fakes, feints, and baits here. But the concept that I want everybody to realize with indirect offense is I am throwing some sort of reaction, or I'm trying to get some reaction with my sword to get Gilligan to react so I get an opening, boom, and then throw. Whereas direct offense, I am throwing. Make sense? Great. All right. Now you have direct defense. I think direct defense is very common for a lot of people. This is where you are block, 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 throw on the counter, right? You block and wait. A lot of people like to just wait their time out. Wait, this is very common in sword and board. You get often like a newer person with sword and board, and they're just okay, boom. I countered the timing, and that's how they win. And then often, reposting as well. That's with the counter time, or like the block strike a little bit as well. All right, lastly, indirect defense. I think this is something that is often very hard to think about. But the way that indirect defense works is you want to play with the spacing between my opponent or your opponent, right? I am using range control. I'm controlling the fight by where Gilligan is relative to me, trying to get Gilligan out of position, right? If I can get Gilligan to like step really hard this way, and I counter on the off step, something like that. Trying to bait Gilligan out. So if I had like a board and I drop my shoulder, or the board over my shoulder a little bit, or under my shoulder, sorry, and I try to get him to throw, boom, something like that. That's actually really fun to do if you can land it. Dodging, right? This is something where if I know Gilligan likes to throw a high cross, or my opponent likes to throw a high cross, and I can get an instigation where I throw. Well, we're supposed to hit the mic. You hit my sword into the mic. Okay, sure. It's your fault. Okay. If I can, we'll go slow. Right, so if I can get Gilligan to instigate into a high cross, you throw a high cross, boom, right? So the actual better way to do that is dark side. Dark side is the natural counter to a high cross. Also, you can do fading. I really like doing fading. So this is where if I can get Gilligan to come in and then fade out, I'm throwing a shot as I disengage. I really love to do this in single sword, where I step in, half step, and back out. That fade, right, I'm using range control to get Gilligan to come in, to commit to an attack, and then I'm disengaging and using that distance to protect myself. Okay? All right, so now how does the rock, paper, scissors kind of work and why? All right, so I'll start with the top, direct offense. And why does direct offense beat indirect offense? Now, I described with indirect offense, it's centered very heavily around getting responses, right? And so this often requires like a lot of combos with your fakes and your feints. I mean, it doesn't really matter. So I don't really need that actually. Okay. If I throw like this pump and I want to get that hip, you know, to get the money, I have to get Gilligan to move. Direct offense, I don't really give a shit about this whole thing. I'm going to counter time. I've actually died in a tournament trying to be fancy with an indirect offense, and I was fighting a direct offensive fighter and I didn't realize it, and I threw a fake and I just got blasted in the shoulder. I was like, oh dude, I'm dead. Yeah, that sucked. It was in the pits, so it was okay. But right, the whole concept of indirect offense is around getting a response. Direct offense doesn't care about the response because it's a flurry of blows. You're often with direct offense trying to overwhelm your opponent by just straight attacks. Does that make sense in what I'm describing? Great. Let's see. Yeah, so direct offense is breaking the timing, using the combos and the chains to overwhelm your indirect offensive fighter. All right, so now we have indirect offense beats direct defense. All right, so now this is where the engagement of instigating responses really, really flourishes. Because a direct defensive fighter, they're going to commit to the defend, right? So a direct offense and a direct defense fighter, when they're fighting each other, it's kind of a grind because it's very straightforward, right? It's boom, block, boom, block, boom, block. We didn't do a really good job there of describing it. All right, we're gonna boom block. We're gonna block strike very slowly. Boom. Ha! I win. Ha! Sucker. Right. That's. There's not like a much of an advantage in that sort of situation. Yeah, you started to pick up in the middle. But with indirect, right? Indirect offense fighting a direct defensive fighter. Come this way just a little bit. I am gonna fake throw. Gillian, as a direct defensive fighter, is going to commit to the block, and that commitment is what I'm capitalizing on because he's falling for it, right? So, yeah, it's all about direct defensive fighters often commit to whatever is happening. And that's kind of about it. There's not a lot of like further explanation, in my opinion. So that makes sense, yes? Great. All right, so now we have direct defense beats indirect defense, okay? And so the reason why direct defense, okay, let me explain it really fast. So indirect defense, it's all about getting your opponent to commit to like the spacing or getting them off step, or indirect defense really relies on your opponent to instigate at the start, okay? Direct defense also wants you to instigate, your opponent to instigate, but they're more committed, right? As a direct defensive fighter, there's not going to be a lot of like movement. Typically, a lot of direct defensive fighters, they're going to be here, right? Imagine I have a board. I'm going to wait for you to come in. If you're moving around a lot, whatever, okay, I don't care. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for you to throw. Yeah, indirect defense is really relying on your opponent to make a commitment. direct defense requires you to commit to counter. Does that make sense? A little bit? Yeah? So, you know, as a direct defensive fighter, you're in direct defense, you're going to be stepping around me a lot, right? You're gonna try to throw a shot to get me to instigate, for me to come in, right? I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to wait to counter time, right? I'm just going to sit here, boom, you know, whatever, stuff like that. So then now, lastly, we have indirect defense over here beats direct offense. Now, hopefully by this point, you guys can make the logical gap of why this works, right? Direct offense, it's very straightforward. I'm going to throw a bunch of shots. I'm ready to commit to an attack. Indirect defense wants to prioritize or capitalize on that commitment, right? So, I'm going to, you're going to be the direct offense fighter. I'm indirect defense. I'm going to step in a little bit, and you as the direct offensive fighter is like, oh, it's time to dance, right? So then you throw something. Well, that was late. You weren't supposed to throw that fast. The point is, also, you didn't step in at all.
You were in.
It was a range, maybe for your...
Yeah, okay, anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, all right. So, as the indirect offensive fighter, maybe I step out, right? You want to step in. So I'm going to step out and let that movement come in to close the range. All right, now it's my time to capitalize. As the indirect offensive fighter, I'm really watching for the body movement. Direct defense fighter. Yeah, indirect defense. Thanks, sorry. As the indirect defense fighter, I'm watching the movement of the body. When, you know, Gilligan steps in, what sort of snapshot I'm seeing is more or less exposed, okay? Stuff like that. So, you know, maybe that requires me to instigate a shot, but I'm going to instigate a shot in a safe space. I'm not going to instigate a shot here. I'm not going to instigate a shot necessarily here because I can die here. I would maybe instigate a shot here, throwing right at his hand at the extent of his reach. So then that makes Gilligan come in. I counterstep, throw. Something like that. Does that make sense? Great. That's awesome. All right, so now quickly, how do we kind of use this, right? This is a sort of kind of abstraction, conceptualization of how people fight. Typically, fighters lean very heavily into one of these camps, right? When I started, I was very direct offense. It was just like, cowabunga, boys, right? Ha! Ta, 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 ta. A lot of other fighters, like I kind of mentioned, especially when they pick up a board, they're very direct defensive, like, okay, here I am, block, 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 throw, haha, I win, right? Those are typically where you're going to sit. The majority of fighters are going to sit in those two camps, those two styles. As people get more advanced, they begin to step into the other styles, right? But no matter what, a lot of people will generally fight in one or the other style, right? They'll lean very heavily to one. There's also, I think, a common saying that if you want to get Warlord, if you want to be like a high tier fighter, you have to be like an expert in at least two of these, right? You can't be a stagnant fighter, because if you're a stagnant fighter, if you only fight in one sort of mode, or one sort of style, if you come across somebody else that is, if I only know how to fight direct offense, and Gilligan comes along and he's a indirect defense fighter, Gilligan's going to eat my lunch every single day, like every single fight, right? So as a warlord, you have to be able to adjust to the fighters that you're fighting. So typically you have to be really good at 2 and then sort of proficient in the other ones to be warlord. That's like the general saying. But for your everyday person, I think the majority of the people that are going to watch this, you can sort of think about it in ways to supplement your learning, right? Supplement your fighting styles of, all right, look at yourself, think about how you fight, where you sit in one of these 4 styles, and then where could you benefit the most? Does that make sense? Right? Because if you only fight direct offense, then maybe it will be good for you to learn how to do some feints and fakes, or learn how to be more of a direct defensive fighter. So you can sort of tailor your learning from that. Ideally, when you begin to try to step into these different modes, I would recommend trying to have complementary styles, right? So if you're direct offense, learn direct defense, because you now have like the counterbalance, right? If you come across somebody that's an indirect offensive fighter, go to direct defense mode. If you're fighting somebody that's an indirect defense, go to direct defense mode, right? Sort of you can play between the two. When I started on my grind and everything, and I didn't like know about this, I just kind of like was learning things on my own. I became a direct offense and indirect defense fighter. And so I was like, I did very well against people that did feints and fakes, but to win against direct defense fighters, I just had to overwhelm them, and I had to be faster, which that's not like energy efficient, right? It becomes very grindy. So this is a way to sort of like become more efficient in your fighting. All right, so I think really this is a great way to learn and sort of tailor your growth. But I want to first talk about or before I end, I want to talk about the limitations of this framework. And I think this is really important to understand when thinking about these styles. So this is a very nice, like, ideal case of like, okay, I'm in direct defense mode. I'm in now indirect offense mode, right? It's not, reality isn't so clean. I'm not like driving a stick shift all the time. In reality, as I fight in any given moment, I'm switching or I'm using multiple styles all at the same time. So it's not like so cut and dry, but when you watch somebody fight over a longer period of time, you can begin to pick up trends or patterns in where they begin to shift. Does that make sense? Right? So it is very dynamic. It is kind of like a shifting spectrum. So just keep that in mind. Many of the concepts between direct defense, like all the different styles, they kind of intermingle. Block strike, for example, it sits within both the direct offense and the direct defense camp. They are counter to one another. So that's also something to think about. It's not necessarily like I have this one tool, it only is used for one style. It is used across multiple styles. Also, another thing to think about is that there are exceptions to each case. It's not purely ever that, oh, I'm fighting Gilligan, and Gilligan is a purely direct offensive fighter. That doesn't mean that if I fight indirect defense, I will always beat Gilligan. There's different cases in which I can still lose to the counter style. But, you know, I think overall this is a neat framework to sort of, again, really tailor how you learn and what's to come next. And then maybe within like a given fighting environment or within a match, you can realize, like, track the trends and then adjust how you're fighting within a tournament per se, or in a 1v1 spars, so you can see if you can get wins that way. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, well, that's pretty much all I have. Thank you all for your time and attention, and I look forward to you guys on my next installment on the Newb to Warlord series. Thanks, guys.
My man.